Welcome back to the Tactic Reloader. Today, we're jumping into something pretty critical for legally armed citizens. It's all about how you handle interactions with law enforcement.
That's right. We've been looking at some really interesting insights that came out of the 2025 NRA annual meeting down in Atlanta, specifically focusing on that intersection, law-abiding armed citizens and police officers.
And we've got perspectives from two key people to help us sort of unpack this. First, there's Jacob Paulsen. He's the president of concealedcarry.com, which, is a big resource for permit holders. And he brings this data-driven look from a survey he did. Over 1,600 traffic stops involving armed folks.
Yeah, really solid data there. And then complementing that, we have Glenn Heuer. He's the director of the NRA's law enforcement division. So he brings, decades of actual police experience to the table. Very different angle.
So you get this great mix, right? The numbers and the street level reality. Our mission here for you listening is to try and provide some clear, actionable advice, how to interact safely, effectively when you're legally carrying. We want you to feel informed, prepared, but not totally overwhelmed by it all.
Exactly. And maybe let's start with something that might surprise some people. It's this whole issue of disarmament during traffic stops. Jacob Paulsen's survey, that big one over 1,600 stops, actually showed that officers asking someone to disarm was, pretty rare. Happened in only about 10% of the stops people reported.
Okay, 10%. So let's unpack that. That sounds like the common idea, that the moment you say you're armed, the officer wants your gun. That's maybe not quite right.
The data suggests not, at least not automatically. It seems like most of the time officers are okay with a legally armed person keeping their firearm holstered, provided, of course, the interaction stays calm, professional, safe.
Okay, but what about that 10%? You said disarmament did happen sometimes.
Right. And what's really interesting there is how it happened. In nearly 20% of those cases, so a small slice of the total, but still important pick, the officer actually asked the citizen to physically hand over their firearm.
And I gather that's where things get a bit tricky.
Very tricky. Both Paulsen and law enforcement experts strongly caution against doing that.
Handing over a loaded firearm during a stressful stop, I could see how that might increase risk.
Absolutely. It just introduces variables you don't need. The advice from Paulsen, and this is echoed by tactical trainers, even police trainers, it's pretty clear. If an officer asks you to hand over your gun, the recommended response is a polite refusal to actually handle the weapon yourself right then. Paulsen suggests saying something like, officer, I'm not comfortable handling my gun in front of you. You're welcome to retrieve it if needed.
Okay, so the key thing isn't just if you're disarmed, but how. And the advice is, don't be the one to physically move the gun in that situation. Let the officer do it if they feel it's necessary.
Precisely. It minimizes the chance of, a tragic mistake.
Right.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Another area with maybe some confusion is the duty to inform. Whether you legally have to tell an officer you're carrying.
Yeah, Paulsen's survey hit on that too. And it found, a pretty significant number, about 21% of the people surveyed were actually wrong about their own state's laws. Sometimes they thought they didn't have to inform when the law said they did, or maybe vice versa.
21% incorrect. Wow. That could obviously lead to, legal trouble you didn't intend.
Definitely. Which brings us to Paulsen's really crucial takeaway here. You absolutely have to know your state's laws on this cold, zero ambiguity.
No guessing allowed. Got it.
Exactly. It's not just a suggestion. It's a legal necessity.
Yeah.
But then there's another layer Paulsen brought up, more of a tactical thing, which is, in a lot of states now, when the officer runs your license.
Your computer system might flag it anyway, that you have a permit.
Exactly. That information might pop right up on their screen.
Okay, so if the officer's probably going to find out one way or another.
Yeah.
What's the thinking there? Paulsen's take, and it makes sense, is that if the computer is likely going to tell them, it's probably better for that news to come from you first. Verbally, he put it pretty directly. If the computer's going to tell them, you want it to come from you, not the screen.
Right. So being upfront avoids looking like you were trying to hide something, even if you weren't legally required to say anything in that state. Builds a bit of trust, maybe.
That seems to be the idea. Proactive disclosure can set a better tone.
So if you do decide to inform, or if your state requires it, what's the smart way? Obviously, you don't want to be reaching around as the officer walks up.
Oh, absolutely not. That's rule number one. Both Paulsen and Glenn Heuer were really clear on this. No sudden movements towards the glove box, under the seat, pockets, anything like that. That's a huge red flag for an officer.
So what's the recommended script then?
The procedure they both basically recommend is, window down, both hands on the steering wheel, clearly visible, then calmly and clearly say something like, "Officer, just to let you know, I have a concealed carry permit and I am currently armed. How would you like me to proceed?"
Hands on the wheel. That seems like the critical starting point. Makes sense.
It really is. Traffic stops are tense, for everybody involved. Clear, non-threatening communication right from the start is key. Paulsen even suggested, practice what you'll say before it happens. Just having that phrase ready can make a difference when you're nervous.
Good advice. And what if they ask where the firearm is?
Be specific. Again, clarity helps everyone. Paulsen used a good contrast. Instead of saying, oh, it's back here somewhere.
Vague, not helpful.
Right. Much better to say something precise like, it's in a holster at my 4 o'clock position on my belt, or it's secured in the center console. Specificity reduces ambiguity.
Okay, that covers a lot from Paulsen's data and advice. Let's bring in Glenn Heuer's perspective now. The view from someone with decades in law enforcement. What was his main message?
Heuer's core point really was about the officer's mindset. When they walk up to that car, they simply don't know who you are. They just don't. So initially, they have to approach every stop with caution, treating everyone essentially as a potential unknown risk until they can assess things.
And he used that really sobering example, didn't he, about officers mistakenly shooting other plainclothes or off-duty officers?
Yes, that was powerful. His point was, look, if we can't always identify our own, we certainly can't assume that a civilian with a gun is automatically a good guy. It just highlights the immense pressure and the difficulty of making instant judgment.
Absolutely. So knowing that's the officer's reality, what nonverbal things did Heuer suggest you, as the armed citizen, can do to help de-escalate that initial uncertainty?
He focused on body language and signaling cooperation right away. Simple things, but effective. Like at night, turn on your dome light so they can see inside the car clearly.
Makes sense.
Keep both your hands, palms up ideally, on the steering wheel from the moment they approach. And make sure your passengers do the same. Keep their hands visible. It sends a clear message before you even speak. Heuer said, "You're showing us before we even say a word that you mean no harm."
Okay, proactive cooperation through body language. Now, what if things do start to feel wrong? If an interaction seems like it's going sideways, as they say, like say the officer insists you hand over your gun, even after you've expressed discomfort, what's the advice then?
This was another point where both Heuer and Paulsen actually agreed strongly. If you feel unsafe, uncertain, or that a request is improper, the advice is to politely, calmly ask to speak with a supervisor.
Ask for a sergeant or lieutenant.
Exactly. Paulsen made the point, every patrol shift has one. A supervisor is always available. Don't be afraid to make that request if you genuinely feel the situation warrants it.
That seems like a reasonable step. Better than arguing or escalating things yourself. What about recording the encounter?
Yes, that came up too. It's definitely an option to consider. You need to know your state's laws, but in most states, we have what are called single-party consent laws.
Meaning you can legally record your conversation with the officer without having to announce, "Hey, I'm recording this."
Generally, yes, in most places. You are a party to the conversation, so your consent is enough. Again, check your specific state law, but it's often permissible.
And Paulsen felt having that recording could be useful.
He did. His view was having a record could be invaluable if something goes wrong. It provides an objective account if there's a dispute later.
Okay. So as we kind of wrap this up, looking at all these pieces, the data, the experience, the advice, what's the big picture goal here? What should you be aiming for in these interactions?
The absolute most important thing, the ultimate goal, isn't about winning the stop or proving a point. It's simply about ensuring everyone goes home safe. You, the officer, any passengers. Safety is paramount.
And achieving that safety takes? What's thinking ahead?
Yeah, thinking ahead, definitely. Knowing your rights, but also your responsibilities. Understanding the law, like we talked about, and approaching these interactions with maybe some humility, respect, and just clear, calm communication.
It really does underscore that carrying a firearm legally comes with, well, significant responsibility.
It absolutely does. But the message from both Paulsen and Heuer seems to be that with the right approach, good mindset, proper training preparation, these encounters can be handled safely and respectfully.
So the key takeaways seem to be, know the law cold, communicate clearly and calmly, use non-threatening body language, And always, always prioritize safety over ego.
That sums it up really well.
And for you listening, we hope this deep dive has maybe clarified some things, given you some practical tools, and helped you feel more informed about navigating these situations without, making it sound scarier than it needs to be.
Absolutely. And maybe just a final thought to leave you with. How does this information change how you think about your own preparedness, your own responsibilities? Are there maybe some further steps you could take? Perhaps reviewing those specific state laws or thinking about additional training, things like, understanding use of force laws better or your right to remain silent. There's always more to learn to be a truly responsible armed citizen. All right. Thanks for tuning in. Really appreciate you being here. Until next time, take care, shoot straight, and stay safe out there.